The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I held it up to the light streaming through our brownstone's kitchen window, reading the elegant script for the third time. Waverly Holdings Annual Investment Gala. Black tie required. At the bottom, in smaller print, Eliot Madsen, guest of Vivian Waverly, Operations Director. Guest, not partner, not husband of 5 years. Guest. I set the invitation on our granite countertop and poured another cup of coffee, the bitter taste matching my mood perfectly. Through the window, I could see Mrs. O'Malley across the street watering her petunias with the dedication of a woman who had nothing better to do than watch the neighborhood drama unfold. She caught my eye and waved. I waved back, knowing she'd probably noticed the expensive paper in my hand from 50 feet away. "You're up early," Vivian said, gliding into the kitchen in her silk robe, hair already perfect despite having just woken up. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent years climbing corporate ladders in designer heels. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, not mentioning that she'd come home at nearly midnight again, claiming another emergency board meeting. In 5 years of marriage, Waverly Holdings had apparently experienced more emergencies than a hospital emergency room. She poured herself coffee in the delicate china cup she insisted on using, never the regular mugs like normal people. "Did you get your tux cleaned for tonight?" "Tonight?" Vivian sighed, the kind of sound she made when explaining something to someone she considered intellectually inferior. "The gala, Eliot. I told you about it weeks ago." I picked up the invitation again. "Right, where I'm listed as your guest." "Well, technically you are." She sipped her coffee, studying me over the rim. "It's not like you work for the company." "No, I just run my own fintech startup. Small potatoes compared to moving other people's money around." "Don't be dramatic." Vivian checked her phone, already shifting into work mode. "Gregory specifically requested that spouses be included this year. It's going to be a very important evening." Gregory Roth, Vivian's boss, the golden boy CEO who'd taken over Waverly Holdings 3 years ago and turned it into Boston's hottest investment firm. 46 years old, never married, old money background, and the kind of predatory charm that made middle-aged women forget they were married. "How thoughtful of Gregory," I said. Vivian missed the sarcasm entirely, or chose to ignore it. "He's been incredibly supportive of my career. Did I mention he's recommending me for the senior director position?" She had mentioned it about 50 times in the past month, usually while explaining why she needed to work late again, or attend another weekend strategy session, or fly to another client meeting that seemed to require a lot of new lingerie. "That's great, Viv, really." She kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and unfamiliar. "I need to run. Don't forget, 7 o'clock sharp, the Fairmont Ballroom." After she left, I sat in our kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of success we'd built together. The brownstone in Beacon Hill, the imported fixtures, the art we'd carefully selected during weekend gallery visits back when we actually spent weekends together. Everything perfect, everything in its place, everything slowly rotting from the inside. I opened my laptop and began typing, pulling up shell company records I'd been carefully constructing for the past 11 months. Phantom Holdings, Meridian Capital, Boston Bay Investments, each one a carefully crafted legal entity, each one holding shares of Waverly Holdings purchased through intermediaries and blind trusts. Tyler knocked on my front door at 9, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place down the street. My CTO and closest friend, he had the perpetually rumpled look of someone who'd rather be coding than dealing with humans. "You look terrible," he said, handing me a cup. "Thanks, come in." We went to my home office, where I had 3 monitors displaying various corporate filings, stock purchases, and legal documents. Tyler whistled low. "Jesus, Eliot, this is really happening?" 51% as of yesterday, I confirmed. Took almost a year, but I own controlling interest in Waverly Holdings. And Vivian has no idea? None. She thinks I'm just the handbag husband who gets dragged to company events. Tyler sat down, studying the screens. "What's the end game here?" I pulled up another file, this one containing photographs, hotel receipts, and credit card statements. Justice. The photos were grainy but clear enough. Vivian and Gregory entering the Ritz-Carlton on dates that corresponded with her client meetings. Vivian and Gregory at a restaurant in Cambridge on a night she'd claimed to be visiting her sister. Vivian and Gregory in the lobby of a New York hotel during a conference that, according to my research, didn't exist. "How long have you known?" Tyler asked. "Suspected for months. Confirmed it 6 weeks ago when I hired Jules Morrison." Jules was a private investigator, former investigative journalist who'd lost her job when the newspaper industry collapsed. She had a nose for scandal and no qualms about following cheating spouses through hotel lobbies. "And tonight?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. Tonight, I stop being the guest and start being the host. The rest of the day passed in careful preparation. I reviewed my speech, confirmed the press packets would be ready, and made final calls to ensure every piece was in place. At 5 o'clock, I put on my tuxedo, the same one I'd worn to our wedding 5 years ago. It still fit perfectly. Vivian came home at 6:30, rushing upstairs to change. She emerged 20 minutes later in a black designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She looked stunning, which made what was coming even more satisfying. "You look beautiful," I said, and meant it. "Thank you." She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror one final time. "Ready?" I've been ready for months. The Fairmont Ballroom was everything you'd expect from Boston's elite trying to impress each other. Crystal chandeliers, gold leaf accents, waiters in white gloves carrying champagne that cost more per bottle than minimum wage workers made in a day. The city's financial elite mingled in small groups, discussing market trends and vacation homes with the casual indifference of people who'd never worried about money. Vivian immediately began working the room, introducing me to colleagues as my husband Eliot, with the same tone she might use to mention an accessory. I played the part perfectly, the slightly awkward spouse who didn't quite belong, smiling politely while the real players talked business. "Eliot, right?" A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses extended his hand. "Oscar Lee, Vivian's assistant. We've spoken on the phone." Oscar had been feeding me information for 6 weeks, though Vivian didn't know that. His loyalty, like most things, had been purchased at fair market value. "Good to finally meet you in person," I said. "Likewise." Oscar glanced around the room. "Should be an interesting evening." Gregory Roth held court near the stage, surrounded by admirers and sycophants. He was everything central casting would order for a corporate villain. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. When he spotted Vivian, his face lit up with genuine warmth, the kind of expression he'd never shown me in 3 years of company parties. "There's my star," Gregory said, taking Vivian's hand and holding it just a moment too long. "You look absolutely radiant." "Thank you, Gregory. You remember my husband, Eliot." Gregory's handshake was firm, his eye contact direct. "Of course. The tech entrepreneur. How's business?" "Can't complain," I replied. "Though I imagine it's nothing compared to what you're doing here." "We've had a good year," Gregory said with false modesty. "Of course, a lot of that success is due to Vivian's brilliant work." Vivian beamed under his praise like a flower turning toward the sun. "Gregory's being too generous?" "Not at all. In fact, I was hoping to discuss some exciting developments with you later." They exchanged a look that lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. "Well," I said, "I should let you two talk business. I'll just be the supportive spouse in the corner." I walked away before either could respond, making my way to the bar where I ordered a whiskey neat. The bartender was young, probably working his way through college, and he poured with the careful attention of someone who couldn't afford to make mistakes. "Rough crowd?" he asked quietly. "You have no idea." From my position at the bar, I had a perfect view of the room. Vivian and Gregory had moved closer together, their conversation animated and intimate. Serena Blake, Vivian's mentor and best friend at the company, joined them, creating a tight triangle of conspiracy. At 8:30, Gregory took the stage to welcome everyone and introduce the evening's agenda. He spoke with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being the center of attention, making jokes that weren't funny but got laughs anyway because he was the one telling them. "Before we begin tonight's presentation," Gregory said, "I want to recognize some of the outstanding work being done by our team, particularly our operations director, Vivian Waverly, whose innovative strategies have contributed significantly to our growth this year." Applause filled the room. Vivian stepped forward, accepting Gregory's kiss on her cheek with a smile that made my stomach turn. But then something happened that made my heart race for an entirely different reason. As Gregory leaned in to kiss her cheek, Vivian turned her head slightly, and their lips met. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment, she whispered something that carried clearly in the acoustics of the ballroom. "Finally free." The front tables heard it. I saw heads turn, eyebrows raise, glasses pause halfway to lips. Mrs. Patterson from the Historical Society actually dropped her champagne flute, the crystal shattering on the marble floor with a sound like breaking promises. Vivian realized her mistake immediately, her face flushing as she stepped back from Gregory, but it was too late. The damage was done, the words hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn. That's when she saw me. I was no longer at the bar. I was walking toward the stage, straightening my cuffs, my expression calm and focused. The crowd began to murmur as I climbed the steps, Gregory's confident smile faltering as he realized something was happening that wasn't in his script. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, taking the microphone from Gregory's suddenly nerveless fingers. "Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm Eliot Madsen, and I have an announcement that I think will interest everyone here tonight." The ballroom fell silent. Vivian stood frozen, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Gregory had gone pale, his politician's smile replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. "You all know me as Vivian's husband, the +1 who gets invited to these events out of politeness. But what you don't know is that over the past 11 months, through a series of carefully structured acquisitions, I've become the majority shareholder of Waverly Holdings." The silence stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then Vivian's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, exploding against the floor in a shower of crystal and crystal. "I now own 51% of this company," I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics, "which makes tonight less of a celebration and more of a corporate restructuring." The room erupted. Voices rose in confusion and excitement. Board members reached for their phones, and reporters who'd been covering the event as a society piece suddenly realized they had a real story. Gregory stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Gregory." I smiled at him, the kind of smile a shark might give a seal. "Though I suspect there will be several resignations tendered before the evening is over." The ballroom had transformed from elegant soiree to corporate battlefield in the span of 30 seconds. Board members huddled in urgent conversations, their voices creating a buzz of anxiety that seemed to vibrate through the crystal chandeliers. I remained on stage, watching the chaos unfold with the satisfaction of a conductor whose orchestra was finally playing the right notes. Vivian had recovered enough to climb the stage steps, her face a mask of controlled fury that I knew intimately from 5 years of marriage. "Eliot, what are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago," I replied, not bothering to lower my voice. The microphone picked up everything, broadcasting our conversation to the entire room. "Taking control of my investments." "Your investments?" Gregory had found his voice again, though it cracked slightly on the second word. "This is insane. You can't just—" "Actually, I can." I pulled a folder from inside my tuxedo jacket, the papers I'd been carrying like a talisman all evening. "Shell companies are perfectly legal, Gregory. Meridian Capital, Phantom Holdings, Boston Bay Investments, all legitimate entities that have been purchasing Waverly Holdings stock for the better part of a year." Oscar appeared at the base of the stage, carrying several boxes that he began distributing to the stunned audience. "Press packets," he announced cheerfully, "courtesy of the new majority shareholder." I watched faces change as people opened the folders, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to something approaching horror. The packets contained everything Jules Morrison had gathered over 6 weeks of investigation, plus a few additional items I'd uncovered through my own research. "What you'll find in those folders," I said into the microphone, "is documentation of systematic embezzlement, falsified client reports, and misappropriation of company funds, all bearing the signature of our esteemed CEO and his operations director." Vivian grabbed my arm, her nails digging through the fabric of my jacket. "Stop this. Now." I looked down at her hand, then back at her face. "Finally free, right? Isn't that what you said?" The color drained from her face as she realized I'd heard her whispered confession. Around the ballroom, people were reading the documents with growing amazement. Flash photography began as reporters documented the evidence, their cameras capturing images that would be front-page news by morning. "The hotel receipts are particularly interesting," I continued, addressing the room rather than my wife. 18 months of business trips that coincided remarkably with romantic getaways. The Ritz-Carlton has excellent security cameras, by the way. Gregory made a desperate play for damage control. "This is a personal vendetta. A bitter husband trying to destroy his wife's career because she's been stealing from the company she works for," I interrupted. "The co-signed accounts are all documented, Gregory. Every transfer, every withdrawal, every attempt to hide assets in offshore accounts. Vivian's signature is on all of it." That was the beauty of their affair. In trying to help Gregory move money around, Vivian had made herself complicit in his embezzlement scheme. Love had made her careless, and carelessness had made her vulnerable. Serena Blake pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with anger. "This is harassment. Vivian is one of the most ethical people I know." "Really?" I smiled at her, pulling out my phone. "That's interesting, because according to the recordings I have, you've been feeding me information about Vivian's activities for the past month." Serena's face went white. "That's not... I never..." "You did." I played a brief audio clip. Serena's voice clearly audible, discussing Vivian's schedule and Gregory's travel plans. Turns out loyalty is cheaper than I expected. $50,000, wasn't it? The betrayal hit Vivian like a physical blow. She staggered backward, looking between me and Serena with the expression of someone watching their world collapse in real time. "You bought my friends?" she whispered. "I bought information," I corrected. The friendship was apparently never real to begin with. Gregory tried one more time to regain control, stepping toward the microphone. "Security. I want this man removed from—" "Security works for me now," I said pleasantly. "As of 6 o'clock this evening, I terminated your employment contract, Gregory, along with several other executive positions that I felt were redundant." I nodded to Oscar, who produced another set of documents from his seemingly endless supply of folders. "Termination letters. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." The security team, looking uncomfortable but professional, approached the stage. These were men who'd worked for Waverly Holdings for years, but they understood the basic principle of employment. Whoever signs the paychecks gives the orders. "This is illegal," Gregory sputtered. "You can't just fire the entire executive team." "Actually, I can. Majority shareholder privileges." I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice so the microphone wouldn't pick it up. "Did you really think you could steal from a company and sleep with employees' wives without consequences? This isn't a movie, Gregory. Actions have repercussions." The security team was polite but firm, escorting Gregory toward the exit while reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. He tried to maintain dignity, but there's no dignified way to be fired in front of 300 people at your own company party. Vivian remained on stage, isolated and exposed. The woman who'd walked into the ballroom as a rising corporate star was now the center of a scandal that would follow her for the rest of her career. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Because you made a choice," I replied. "You chose Gregory over our marriage. You chose stealing over honesty. You chose to whisper, 'Finally free,' while kissing another man at a public event. I'm just making sure you get the freedom you wanted." The crowd was beginning to disperse, board members heading for exits while reporters lingered to ask questions. I stepped down from the stage, straightening my tuxedo jacket. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "Waverly Holdings will continue operations under new management. Any questions about the transition can be directed to our interim CEO." I gestured to Serena, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Congratulations on your promotion, Serena. Try not to embezzle anything." I woke up in my own bed for the first time in months without the sound of Vivian's alarm clock. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and Mrs. O'Malley's dog barking at something in the street. Sunlight streamed through windows that hadn't been opened in weeks, and I realized I'd forgotten what morning looked like without the weight of deception pressing down on everything. My phone had been buzzing since 5 a.m. Text messages, missed calls, and email notifications created a digital symphony of chaos that I ignored while making coffee in my empty kitchen. The morning news was already running the story, complete with footage from the Gala and expert commentary about corporate governance and hostile takeovers. Local tech entrepreneur exposes wife's affair, takes control of investment firm. Scrolled across the bottom of the screen while a financial analyst explained the legal implications of my acquisition strategy. Tyler arrived at 8 with bagels and the kind of grin usually reserved for people who'd just won the lottery. "You magnificent bastard," he said, dropping the bag on my counter. "It's all over the financial news. Stock market opened down 2 points just on the Waverly Holdings story." "Good thing I'm not planning to sell," I replied, pouring him coffee. "So what now? You actually going to run an investment firm?" I'd been thinking about that question since 3 a.m. Short term, yes. Long term, we'll see. First priority is cleaning house and making sure the client's money is actually where it's supposed to be. My phone rang. Jules Morrison, checking in with her usual professional detachment. "Saw the news," she said without preamble. "Nice work, very public, very thorough. You delivered exactly what I paid for. Always do. Listen, you should know. Vivian's been trying to reach me since midnight. Wants to hire me to investigate you." I laughed, genuinely amused. "What did you tell her?" "That I don't work for people who can't pay my retainer. Word is her accounts got frozen this morning." Funny how that works. After Jules hung up, I reviewed the termination letters that had been delivered overnight. Gregory's severance package had been voided due to breach of fiduciary duty. Vivian's employment had been terminated for cause, eliminating her stock options and pension contributions. Clean, legal, and absolutely devastating. The doorbell rang at 9:30. I opened it to find Vivian standing on my front step, still wearing the same black dress from the Gala but looking like she'd slept in it. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and she was carrying a single suitcase. "We need to talk," she said. "No, we don't." I started to close the door, but she put her hand against it. "Please, Eliot, 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She walked through our house like a stranger, touching familiar objects as if trying to remember what they meant. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Since I found the hotel receipts in your purse 3 months ago," she winced. "I never meant for it to happen. Gregory and we were just working closely together, and things developed naturally." "Naturally?" I interrupted. "You stole money from your own company to fund romantic getaways with your boss. Nothing about that was natural." "The money was always going to be paid back. It was just temporary." "It was embezzlement, Vivian. The FBI is probably going to be very interested in those offshore accounts." Her face went pale. "FBI?" "White-collar crime is still crime. Gregory might have convinced you otherwise, but federal prosecutors tend to disagree." She sank into our living room chair, the same one where she used to read Sunday morning papers while I made breakfast. Now she looked small and defeated, nothing like the confident woman who'd left for work yesterday morning. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "I want you to leave. Pack whatever you can carry and find somewhere else to live. This is my house, too. Actually, it's not." I pulled out another folder, this one containing mortgage documents and property deeds. Funny thing about community property laws, they don't apply to assets purchased with embezzled funds. The house, the car, the investment accounts, all purchased with money that legally belongs to Waverly Holdings. Vivian stared at the papers, her hands shaking slightly. "You can't do this." "I already did. Your belongings will be on the sidewalk by noon. I suggest you find somewhere to put them." She looked up at me with something approaching desperation. "I loved you, Eliot. I still love you." "No, you don't. You loved the idea of me, the stable husband who wouldn't ask too many questions while you played corporate climber with Gregory. But you never loved me enough, to be honest. It was a mistake. It was a choice. Every hotel room, every lie, every forged signature, all choices, and now you get to live with the consequences." The doorbell rang again. This time it was a process server, delivering divorce papers that had been filed at 8 a.m. Vivian's face crumpled as she read the terms. "No alimony?" she whispered. "Adultery and embezzlement tend to void spousal support clauses," I explained. "Your lawyer should have mentioned that." "I don't have a lawyer. I can't afford one." "Then I suggest you find legal aid. You're going to need representation when the criminal charges are filed." She left without another word, dragging her suitcase behind her like an anchor she couldn't quite let go of. Through the window, I watched her walk down the street while Mrs. O'Malley pretended to water plants that had already been watered twice. At noon, a moving truck arrived to collect Vivian's remaining possessions. I supervised the loading, making sure nothing that belonged to the house left with her personal items. The movers were efficient and professional, treating the job like any other domestic dissolution. By 2 o'clock, the house was mine again. I spent the afternoon at Waverly Holdings, reviewing files and meeting with employees who'd survived the executive purge. The office buzzed with nervous energy as people tried to figure out what the new ownership meant for their jobs. Serena knocked on what used to be Gregory's office door at 4 o'clock. She looked exhausted, the weight of sudden promotion combined with public betrayal showing in every line of her face. "The SEC wants to schedule interviews," she reported. "They're treating this as a potential securities fraud case." "Good. Cooperate fully, provide everything they ask for." "What about Vivian?" I looked up from the financial reports I'd been reviewing. "What about her?" "She called me this morning. She's staying at a motel near the airport. She wanted to know if there was any way to work this out." "There isn't." Serena shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know what I did was wrong, taking money from you to spy on my friend, but she was destroying everything she'd worked for, and Gregory was using her. You don't need to justify it to me, Serena. You made a business decision. I respect that." "Do you? Because I feel like garbage about it." I set down the reports and looked at her directly. "Vivian made her choices. You made yours. Gregory made his. Everyone gets to live with the consequences. That's how the adult world works." She nodded slowly. "The board wants to meet tomorrow morning. They're concerned about market confidence and client retention. Schedule it for 9. And Serena, start looking for a permanent CEO. I'm not planning to stay in this business long term." After she left, I sat in Gregory's former office looking out at the Boston skyline. The view was spectacular, worth every dollar Gregory had stolen to maintain his lifestyle, but it felt empty, like a beautiful painting of a place that didn't actually exist. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Drinks tonight? You look like you could use some normal human interaction." I typed back, "Rain check." Still processing. The truth was, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, like I'd won a war by burning down everything worth fighting for. Vivian was gone, Gregory was finished, and I was sitting in an office I'd never wanted, running a company I didn't care about. But justice wasn't supposed to feel good. It was supposed to feel necessary. And as I watched the sun set over Boston Harbor, painting the sky the color of old money and new regrets, I knew I'd done what needed to be done. 3 weeks later, the novelty had worn off completely. Running Waverly Holdings turned out to be exactly as boring as I'd expected. Endless meetings about portfolio management, client relations, and regulatory compliance. The kind of corporate tedium that made me understand why Gregory had started stealing money just to feel alive. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Oscar knocked on my office door, carrying a stack of newspapers and looking unusually excited. "You might want to see this," he said, spreading the papers across my desk. The headlines told the story in stark black and white. Former investment exec arrested in embezzlement scheme. Gregory's mugshot stared back at me from the front page of the Boston Globe, his silver hair disheveled and his politician's smile replaced by the hollow expression of someone who'd finally run out of charm. FBI raided his condo this morning, Oscar reported. Found evidence of additional fraud going back 5 years. Looks like Vivian was just the latest in a long line of accomplices. I studied the photograph, feeling less satisfaction than I'd expected. Gregory looked smaller in handcuffs, more pathetic than menacing. The man who'd stolen my wife and embezzled from his own company was just another middle-aged criminal who'd thought he was smarter than the system. What about Vivian? Cooperating witness. Her lawyer worked out a plea deal, probation and restitution in exchange for testimony. Smart move. Vivian had always been better at cutting deals than taking responsibility for her actions. She'd probably spin her cooperation into some kind of redemption narrative, the innocent wife led astray by a manipulative boss. Tyler arrived for our lunch meeting looking like he'd been up all night coding, which he probably had. My startup was thriving without my daily involvement, mostly because I'd hired people who were better at the technical aspects than I was. "So, when are you coming back to the real world?" he asked, unwrapping a sandwich that looked like it contained enough caffeine to power a small city. "Soon. Serena's doing good work as interim CEO. Once the SEC investigation wraps up, I'll probably sell my shares and get back to building actual technology." "And Vivian?" I'd been expecting that question for weeks. "What about her? Have you talked to her since the divorce was finalized?" "No." "Are you going to?" I considered the question while watching pedestrians navigate the sidewalk 20 floors below. People with normal problems, normal relationships, normal lives that didn't require federal investigations to resolve. There's nothing to say. She made her choices, I made mine. Everything that needed to be said was said in court. Tyler nodded, but I could see he wasn't entirely convinced. He'd known me long enough to recognize when I was avoiding something. "You know," he said carefully, "revenge is supposed to have an ending, a point where you stop and move on with your life. I have moved on." "Have you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're stuck. You took control of her company, destroyed her career, ended her relationship, and sent her boss to prison. Mission accomplished. So why are you still here?" It was a fair question. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to do. Vivian was disgraced, Gregory was in federal custody, and I'd recovered every dollar they'd stolen. By any objective measure, my revenge had been complete and devastating. So why did it feel unfinished? The answer came to me that evening as I sat in my empty house, eating takeout Chinese food and watching the news coverage of Gregory's arrest. The reporter mentioned that Vivian had declined to comment, but they'd managed to get footage of her leaving the federal courthouse after her plea hearing. She looked terrible. Thin, pale, wearing clothes that had probably come from a discount store. Her hair was shorter, styled simply, and she moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that every step might be watched and judged. She looked like someone who'd lost everything, which was exactly what I'd wanted. So why did seeing her like that make me feel worse instead of better? My phone rang, Mrs. O'Malley calling from across the street. "Eliot, dear, are you all right? I saw the lights on very late again last night." Mrs. O'Malley had appointed herself my unofficial guardian since Vivian left, checking on me with the persistence of someone who'd raised 6 children and wasn't about to let a neighbor suffer in silence. "I'm fine, Mrs. O'Malley, just working late." Well, I made too much pot roast again. I'll bring some over." She hung up before I could protest, which was probably for the best. I hadn't been eating properly since the divorce was finalized, subsisting mainly on coffee and whatever Tyler brought to our meetings. Mrs. O'Malley arrived 20 minutes later carrying enough food to feed a small army. She bustled around my kitchen like she owned it, heating food and setting the table with the efficiency of someone who'd been managing households since before I was born. "You look terrible," she announced, the same way she might comment on the weather. "Thanks. You're not the first person to mention that." "When's the last time you had a proper meal, or a full night's sleep, or talked to another human being about something other than business?" I couldn't remember. The past month had been a blur of legal proceedings, corporate meetings, and solitary evenings in a house that felt too big and too quiet. "I'm processing," I said. "Processing what? You won, didn't you? That cheating wife of yours is gone, her boyfriend's in jail, and you're richer than ever. What's left to process?" Mrs. O'Malley had a way of cutting through complexity that was both refreshing and uncomfortable. She'd watched the whole drama unfold from her front window, and her perspective was uncluttered by the emotional complications that kept me awake at night. "It's not that simple," I said. "Isn't it? You were married to a woman who lied to you, stole from her company, and humiliated you in public. You exposed her crimes and ended the marriage. Case closed." She was right, of course. From the outside, it was exactly that simple. But from the inside, it felt like I'd won a war by becoming someone I didn't recognize. "I destroyed her life," I said quietly. "She destroyed her own life. You just made sure everyone could see the damage." Mrs. O'Malley sat across from me at my kitchen table, her expression softening slightly. "Eliot, dear, I've been married for 47 years. I've seen good marriages and bad ones, faithful spouses and cheaters, people who work through their problems and people who don't. What your wife did to you was wrong. What you did to her was justice." "Then why doesn't it feel like justice?" "Because you're a decent person. Decent people don't enjoy destroying others, even when they deserve it." She patted my hand with the gentle firmness of someone who'd comforted countless people through countless crises. "But that doesn't mean you were wrong to do it. Some people only learn from consequences, and some consequences are harsh. Your wife needed to learn that actions have prices. Now she has." After she left, I sat in my kitchen eating her pot roast and thinking about consequences. Vivian had learned her lesson. Gregory was learning his in federal prison, and I was learning mine in an empty house filled with the echo of choices that couldn't be undone. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Serena into my office and handed her a folder containing transfer documents. "What's this?" she asked. "Your company. I'm selling you my shares for exactly what I paid for them." She stared at the papers like they might explode. "I can't afford this." "Payment plan? 10 years, no interest. You've been running the place anyway." "Why?" I looked out the window at Boston Harbor, where container ships moved cargo that would eventually become products that people actually needed. Real work, creating real value, instead of moving money around in circles and calling it productivity. Because I don't belong here. This was never about wanting to run an investment firm. It was about making sure the people who stole from it faced consequences. And now they have? Now they have? I spent the rest of the day cleaning out Gregory's former office, packing the few personal items I'd brought, and leaving everything else for Serena. By 5 o'clock, I was walking out of Waverly Holdings for the last time, carrying nothing but a small box and the satisfaction of knowing that justice, however hollow it felt, had been served. Tyler was waiting in the lobby, grinning like he'd just solved a particularly complex coding problem. "Ready to get back to work?" he asked. "More than ready." As we walked out into the Boston afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the possibility of moving forward instead of looking backward. Revenge, it turned out, wasn't a destination. It was just a very expensive way of buying closure. And now, finally, I was free to find out what came next. 6 months later, I was debugging code at 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I saw the article about your company's IPO. Congratulations. You deserved better than what I gave you. V." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations were better left unfinished. Outside my office window, Boston slept under a blanket of snow that made everything look clean and new. Tomorrow, there would be new problems to solve, new code to write, new possibilities to explore. But tonight, for the first time in over a year, I felt like myself again. The revenge was over. The real work could finally begin.